Okay, Kilo, when you're ready, you can start. We've got your audio and your visual and your slides all ready to go. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Lucy. Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Lee, aka Kilo Loco. That's where you can find everything about me online as Kilo Loco, and I am a senior developer advocate at AWS. And today I'm going to be talking about full stack Swift development. I'm going to go over what that is. I'm going to go over, why you might want to consider doing full stack Swift development, as well as, show you what the process might be like when making decisions to build out a full stack app. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. So first of all, we need to define what is full stack development, right? So generally, when you hear about full stack development or you think about a full stack developer, what it is usually referring to is a web developer. And a web developer in the sense of they're building out a website, something that you can visually click, you go over to your favorite web app, whatever it is. And then it also involves building out the backend as well. So not only are they making the website look beautiful, but they're also building out the functionality behind it in the backend using some type of framework. And it's usually like something with JavaScript or, there's a lot of different popular options out there, but that's generally what is referred to as a web developer, is somebody, or a full stack developer is somebody that does web development. But in this context, what I'm going to talk about is how mobile app, like how you could build out a mobile app and a backend, and that kind of makes you a full stack developer as well. Because if you take the concept of building out something that a user can interact with, full stack, like a web developer, full stack developer, and you think about it, well, they're building out a website that the user interacts with, and then they build out the backend that is going to essentially drive the functionality of that web app. So here we're going to be talking about full stack development from the standpoint of a mobile developer can be a full stack developer too, because they can build out their own backend. So why would we want to do this, right? Like, why would anybody want to become a full stack developer? Like, are there any benefits, or am I just, putting more work on my plate and it's not going to really benefit me, right? So the first reason is going to be, almost all apps need backends. Just think about any of the apps that you use on a daily basis. More likely than not, they're going to be using a backend. Even if you're using like some of the built-in iOS apps, the fact that they have a cloud where all your data is saved, and then like you have your photos on your phone and then you can show them on your computer or something like that, that requires a backend. So all modern applications, well, not all, but most modern applications require a backend somewhere to actually save and communicate with data. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because it's generally going to be a more in-demand skill, especially if you're going to be either an indie developer or a freelancer. Those are two areas where it's really going to pay off to have full stack developments, a full stack development skill set, because just like I said, most modern applications do require that you have some type of backend that drives the functionality, and you're able to communicate between different devices. Now, the last reason why you might want to consider it is just it's going to build your skill set, right? Like whenever you work with different technologies, generally that's just going to build up your skill set no matter what you do, right? Whenever you're working with something new or something different, you're going to learn going down that path. You build out a full stack Swift Swift app. Guess what? You're going to learn a couple of different things along the way, a couple of different technologies, and it's probably going to benefit you somewhere down the future. If not directly in your job, then maybe just having a better understanding of how everything fits together the next time you're assigned a project. So what is stopping Swift developers from actually becoming full stack developers? Like, why haven't they become full stack developers up until more recently? Well, like there's some pre-existing roadblocks. That's what it comes down to, right? The first thing is just awareness. A lot of people are just simply not aware that you can do full stack development with Swift, regardless of what that means to you, whether it means being a web developer or if it means being a mobile developer that can build out a backend. You can do both of those things all in Swift, and you don't actually need to reach out to other, languages or frameworks in order to get up and running. So that's the first problem, is like a lot of people just are not aware that this is even a possibility. When people think about Swift, generally they think about it as an Apple platform programming language, iOS, tvOS, macOS, but they don't really hear about all the other things that Swift is capable of doing. Now, a lot of the time when you hear about building out a backend, especially lately, or at least in my circle, I hear about JavaScript being on the backend. Now, JavaScript wasn't originally intended for being a backend framework, but just like the Swift community, the JavaScript community loves their language and they're looking to put it everywhere that they possibly can. And the idea is that you can essentially have a very similar code base, or you write out all the code in one place and then you share that code in other places. And that's essentially what Swift is. That's what the Swift community kind of wants. They kind of want Swift to be everywhere that they can possibly use it. So the last thing that I'll say is that one of the pre-existing roadblocks is that it's just a steep learning curve to get into backend development. So it can be really tough and it can be kind of overwhelming when it comes to learning all the different concepts and technologies that go along with knowing how to build out a backend. So what we're going to do is we're going to be building out this little chat app, right? And we're going to do it from like a 10,000-foot view and just kind of see what options we have presented to us along the way in order to build this thing out. And what this is going to consist of is, obviously, it's a chat app, so you need to be able to communicate between two device instances, right? You have an iPhone, I have an iPhone, and we're able to talk to each other. So that's the end goal, right? And in order for us to talk to each other, not just have a pretty app, in order for us to talk to each other, we actually need that backend. And the last thing that I wanted to also talk about with this app is, usually when you deploy an app, you need to have somewhere for your terms and service and your privacy policy and things like that. You can do, a service where it provides that stuff for you. But generally what you're going to need is some type of website. So we're also going to talk about how you can build out a website also using Swift, and how that's going to kind of factor into when you're building out a full stack Swift app. So where do we want to start, right? Well, first thing that I do, I buy a domain. And unfortunately, I have a lot of purchased domains where, things just didn't work out the way that I thought they were. I thought I was going to have more time doing stuff. It didn't work out like that. Maybe you're like me, I don't know. Anyways, first thing that I do is I check for a domain. Not necessarily the most financial best decision, but it is the first thing that I go for, so I can make sure that I have like a unique name for my app. And then if I do actually publish this thing, then I could just buy the domain name, right? So in this instance, let's say that we wanted to buy Swift Heroes Chat, right? And then we could just go over to some hosting provider. I'm choosing Route 53. You can choose whatever you want, but I generally choose this because it's only $12. But yeah, first I would recommend at least checking if the domain is available, and that will kind of ensure that you do have a unique name. And if you want to be like me and splurge a little bit and then not do anything with your domain name, feel free to, just not do anything with it. Next, what I would recommend is actually building out the UI. So building out the UI is pretty important for a couple of different reasons. It lets you make sure that you have like a visual layout of all the things that your app can entail, right? So actually being able to see how your app is going to be laid out is going to help you make decisions about how everything's going to fit together when it comes to backend. And also, in my past experience, when I've done the design flow for an app, what has helped me is seeing the parts that are reused in the design and letting me know, hey, I might need a class or some type of protocol or something like that where I can reuse this functionality somewhere else. So that's another thing. And I generally recommend using either Sketch or Figma. Sketch is, you have to pay. I think they have a 30-day free trial, but Figma is free for, I think, individuals. So that's a really cool option as well. And that one's in the browser too. So then what we want to do is we want to think through like all the different problems. And essentially we want to find out, okay, this is where we're going to run into this situation. How do we connect these two different screens together? How do I jump from here to over there? And that's going to, like I said, it's just going to lay out all the different possibilities for you so you can kind of think through that stuff. Now, after you have your design, if you choose to go the design route, because it is optional, after you have your design, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start building out the UI, right? So then we have, the question that keeps coming up all over the community. Should I get started with UIKit or SwiftUI? Now, this is like an extremely opinionated topic, right? You can go basically either way, but like just be careful with what you say online, because oh boy, do people love their framework of choice. That's just the developer way. You start working with a tool and you end up loving it, and then you want to defend it. So it's an opinionated topic, but it's really just two different ways of really doing things, and you're just coding in completely different fashions. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but both of them have their pros and cons, right? So like regardless of which one you choose, there's going to be pros and cons to both. So let's talk a little bit about UIKit, right? So UIKit is old, but that's actually a benefit for it, right? UIKit is battle tested. It's been through the ringer. A lot of people have it in their projects. And, there's just going to be a lot of different resources that you can find whenever you want to solve a problem, right? So that's one thing. Another thing, which, a lot of people see as cons, but I see it as, a pro in a lot of cases, is the drag and drop interface with storyboards. So you can use either Zibs or storyboards, but essentially the idea here is that you can drag and drop your UI. And, if you are, more of a visual person as opposed to being somebody that's like very programmatic, then you can use storyboards. That's one option, but you can also go down the programmatic route. Now, caveat obviously is that's going to always be brought up is working with storyboards on teams, merge conflicts and things like that, but we're not talking about that today. And this is the imperative programming approach, right? So imperative programming, you're kind of explicitly stating what you want your state to do. You're manually manipulating your state and changes with your app. And that's what imperative programming is. A lot of different programming areas, there's a lot of different programming languages and frameworks that are moving to a more declarative approach, which is what SwiftUI essentially is doing. And then past experience. So a lot of people have worked with UIKit before in the past. And if you do have a lot of experience, that's only going to accelerate you through the development process. So it's going to make it much quicker. Now let's talk a little bit about SwiftUI, right? Because that's the new hotness. Everybody's talking about it. You're going to see tutorials. You're going to see videos. I'm going to put out videos. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be bam, right in your face. And you can't really escape it. I'm sorry. So then one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people love SwiftUI is the fact that it's so much less code in order to get something up and running. And that makes your code a little bit sexy, to be honest. Like it's a little bit sexy. I'm not going to lie. So that's what's really enticing about it. And then you don't get those merge conflicts that you would normally get with storyboards, like as I brought up before. And then also Apple is pushing SwiftUI pretty heavily, right? We're getting SwiftUI only features like widgets last year, right? And it's only going to become more and more popular as time goes by. So essentially, SwiftUI is a great option if you want to do like the whole cross-platform within Apple thing, right? If you want to be able to build for iOS, iPad, tvOS, macOS, all the different things, right? So that's why it's a really great option. But overall, it all comes down to both of these can get the job done. So this accounts for your front end, right? You're able to either get the job done with UIKit or SwiftUI, probably a little bit of both, most likely, especially if you go with SwiftUI. But yeah, so now let's go ahead and start building this thing out, right? So what does that process look like? Well, we wanted to build out the functionality first, right? So we're still kind of going through the UI approach. And first, I would recommend is building out the actual screens. That's kind of how I like to approach the situation. I build out the entire screen, the UI itself. And then what I would do from there is I would build out like the local functionality, which I would kind of account for as like animations, navigation within the app, like moving between each of those screens so that, when you tap a button, it actually takes you somewhere. You don't have to like rerun the entire project and show a different screen, right? And then it allows you to also think of all the different APIs that you need in order to drive this functionality, right? Like, for example, this screenshot that we have of the chat rooms, we know that we're going to need users. We know that we're going to need some type of chat room. And we know that we're going to need some type of message, right? We can see all of that right here in this UI because we have the avatar, the user's name, and then the message that's associated with whatever that chat room is. So it allows you to kind of see what you need to build out when it comes to APIs in a backend. So now let's talk about the backend options, right? There's just like there's so many choices, right? And that's like one of the intimidating parts about getting started in backend development is that there's way too many choices to choose from. So a traditional route would look like using one of these languages to get up and running and build out your backend, right? C++, Java, PHP, Ruby. There's probably a lot more that I'm missing, obviously, right? And these are like some of the traditional routes for building out your backend. And there's a lot of resources out there. Then you have the more modern methods, right? Which are options like building it out in Go. It's a relatively newer language, Python, and JavaScript. Now, once again, JavaScript is not supposed to be on the web or on the back end, but the community loves it so much that you'll hear about JavaScript frameworks being created all the time, JavaScript in weird places that you would never expect, right? Like, so now you can do your front end using JavaScript. That's where it started. You have the back end in JavaScript as well. And then you have frameworks like React Native, which allow you to do mobile development with JavaScript, right? And that's kind of the thing that the Swift community really wants, right? The Swift community wants to be able to do Swift in a lot of different places. And what I'm here to tell you is that we are capable of doing it. It's just knowing how to do some of this stuff and knowing what our options are to do some of this stuff. So we just want to work with Swift. That's the end goal. We want to work with Swift. We don't want to touch any languages, especially not JavaScript. Like, I don't like it. I just don't like it. And we just want to try to put Swift everywhere, right? It might not be the right tool for the job, but F it, let's just go with it, right? So let's talk about server-side Swift and what are our options when it comes to doing server-side Swift. Well, we have a couple of different frameworks, and server-side Swift is going to allow you to just like write out your Swift code, and essentially what you're going to be responsible for doing is interacting with your backend, or well, it is your backend, but it's going to be responsible for interacting with your database or any other services that you may be using, right? And some of the frameworks that you might be able to choose from are these three. Now, Perfect Swift is the first one that I was aware of. I think that one came out first. Don't quote me on that. I didn't check it, but it was the first one that I heard about. I haven't touched it since I first heard about it when it was Perfect One, but I didn't have like an easy way of using it. And that's when I actually started using Vapor. So Vapor is still a super popular framework for server-side Swift. I think it is actually the most popular, but I learned Vapor 1, I've learned Vapor 2, and then I tried learning Vapor 3, but every time Vapor releases a different framework or a different number next to their Vapor, whatever semantic versioning they're using, Vapor 3 is different than Vapor 4, right? It seemed like a really overwhelming switch, and that's just generally why I didn't like working with Vapor so much. If I were to do server-side Swift again, I would probably go back to Vapor just because it has the best community. They used to have a Slack channel, now they have a Discord chat, and they have the best community. I think hands down for anything, honestly. You go in there, you ask a question, and it's almost always responded to and answered. Probably, I've seen like usually in 5 minutes whenever I've asked, but yeah, it's a really great community. Now, I did like Kitura, which is the option you see it right there at the bottom. That was released by IBM. That was my favorite way to interact with the backend, but the problem is that IBM ended up, killing it. And now I think you still can technically use it. I probably wouldn't recommend it just because they pulled the plug on it, and I don't know where the community is at on it, but IBM kind of killed it. So I don't know if that's really an option anymore or not. So just keep that in mind. But I think if you were to choose from one of these three frameworks, I'd probably recommend going with Vapor, even though right now Vapor 4 is out and they're already talking about Vapor 5. So by the time you learn Vapor 4 and 5, things might change. But anyways, that was server side, right? So now let's talk a little bit about serverless and like what exactly is serverless. So serverless is pretty much just using some type of services that will do the job for you, right? So you don't want to necessarily go through all the different steps of setting up a backend, which is what you would have to do if you went with server-side Swift, right? You would have to spin up some type of server. You would have to deploy that backend, and you would have to make all the connections between your backend and your database and all these things yourself. Well, serverless is usually, it could be a lot of different things, but what I'm referring to it as is like a tool set that allows you to get up and running without doing too much coding, like little to no code, and then you're able to have a backend that works for you. And then also it allows you to, add additional services to it, which will allow you to do different functionality whenever you need that specific type of functionality. So let's talk a little bit about the serverless services, right? So the very first one that I was ever introduced to was Parse. Now, Parse is a framework that is just like these other two, which you have Parse at the top left, Firebase at the bottom middle, and AWS Amplify at the top right. So each of these services will specialize in giving you some of these functionalities that are very common inside of apps built right out the box, right? So all three of these will give you the ability to authenticate a user, save some data to a database, and store files as well. So like your avatars, your images, your videos, whatever, stories, because stories are in every single app nowadays, right? But Parse was released by Facebook, and Facebook pulled the plug on Parse in 2017, I think. And now it is community driven. I don't know how strong that community is, but it is an option that's available. Now, Google Firebase, I have several years of experience with Google Firebase. It's a great option. What it allows you to do is all the different services that I mentioned before. You have like real-time database and things like that. And this was always one of the easiest options that I was able to use when I wanted to get a backend up and running without having to actually spin up a whole entire server and code everything out in Vapor myself, right? So then just last year, AWS Amplify released, AWS released AWS Amplify just last year, and I was actually brought onto that team, and now I'm helping developers, essentially learn about it and get better at using it. So let's talk about why I think that you should choose Amplify over something like Parse or Firebase, right? Well, the first reason is it's built on top of AWS services. Now, this is kind of like a pro and a con, right? So it's built on top of existing AWS services, which are built for scale. But at the same time, if you are not familiar with AWS and you need to start doing debugging, you're going to actually need to go deep onto that service. Now, that's a great way to actually start learning AWS. I honestly think it's the easiest way to actually start learning AWS, because when you go onto the AWS website, there's a lot of services to choose from, and the Amplify will help you get through the relevant services to you. It also takes advantage of the fact that you can use Swift Lambda. So like if the built-in functionality is not available, which happens on any of these platforms, right? If you need to do some type of cloud computing, which Parse and Firebase also offer, but you have to write that code in Firebase, or you have to write that code in JavaScript, or they probably have a couple of different languages, but it's mostly JavaScript. The fact that Amplify or you're working with AWS is the fact allows you to work with Swift and Lambda, so you can write your Swift computing functions, which make it a lot easier to just get up and running because the code is relatively simple. And all you need to do is just package up your Lambda and then deploy it to AWS Lambda, and then you'll actually be good to go. So you'll be able to write additional functionality in Swift for your backend. And then lastly, your boy's here for you. That's what it really comes down to. If you are working with AWS Amplify, I'm here to help you. First of all, that's my job. But second of all, I'm always here to help. I love helping people. I hope that, if you have a problem with Amplify, that you come to me and I'll help you out. If I know, and if not, then we're going to go learn together. That's all there is to it. So that's why I think that you should choose Amplify. The other two are also great options, but obviously I'm going to push you towards the thing that I'm constantly working with and the thing that I'm looking to improve as well. So let's go ahead and put this entire app together, right? So like, what does this thing look like when we're trying to put it together? Well, first, let's start off with the login view, right? And as you can see, we're just going to be simply entering in a username and a password. So pretty typical standard, login, right? Now you would obviously need to have like some type of sign up flow or something like that, right? A lot of different other screens, forgot password, things like that, right? But we're keeping it very simple and basic. Login view, what kind of services do we need? Well, we just need Amplify. We need Amplify Auth. So Amplify Auth is a category under Amplify that allows you to authenticate your user. And the service that it's using under the hood is Amazon Cognito. And that allows you to do a lot of different things around permissions and making sure that it's a very secure path to go down when you're logging your user in and making sure that only authenticated users can use your service. Another thing that you may potentially be using with this login flow is data store. So data store, you can think about data store kind of like core data in a sense, in the sense that it is essentially a local database where you're saving your data to, right? So it's built on top of a SQLite database. You save your data to that local database. Now, the thing about data store is that it can work together with another category called API. When you put data store and API together, data store extends itself from being just a local database, and it starts having the ability to sync to a backend as long as you deploy the backend. It will allow you to sync your data to a backend, which gives you the ability to actually save data to different devices, right? Save and read data to and from different devices. So when you put Amplify Data Store and API together, they are able to sync the data back and forth, and that gives you that whole entire real world functionality as opposed to just saving something locally. Once again, just to compare it to something else, it would be like data store being core data out the box. And then when you add the API category, it's similar to just adding iCloud to your app. So core data and iCloud is kind of like data store and API. That's kind of how they fit together. So that's this login view, right? Not too many services needed, just auth, and then the data store. It kind of depends on your implementation, but you may want to save the user into your database, and that may happen in the auth flow, or you might do it somewhere else. Now, we have the other two screens, and the other two screens use pretty much all the same functionality or all the same services that you would need in order to build in the functionality, right? So we're starting off with Amplify API for sure. We need to be able to sync the data. Now you can use Amplify Data Store, right? And Data Store, like I said, is like core data. So if you want to have that offline capability, then that's when you would implement Data Store. Now we can mix and match these as well, right? For the chat rooms, maybe I want to have API and Data Store together so that I can have the actual chat rooms persisted to my device. So whenever the user opens their app, whether they have internet connection or not, they're able to see their past chat rooms, right? But we may or may not want to actually use Data Store for the messages screen, right? Which is the screen on the right, because we might want to just make it so that it's only getting the data directly from the database, or we don't necessarily need that offline capability or what have you, but you can mix and match these different functionalities And then you can just use them based off of whatever you believe the functionality should be for that specific screen. Next, what we need is amplify storage. So amplify storage is going to be where you're able to save files to, right? So files encapsulates, photos, videos, audio files, pretty much any multimedia, right? So in this app, what we would need to do is we would need to save the user's avatar somewhere, right? They update their profile, they need to save their avatar, bam, we put it right there in Amplify Storage. And then we would save a reference to that value that is saved into storage into our database. And then the last service that we would need is Amplify Notifications. So once again, we are sending messages back and forth to each other. So in order for us to receive a notification on our app, what we want to do is we want to set up notifications on our app. And this would actually be using AWS Lambda. And we would write our Swift code in our Swift Lambda code, package that Lambda up, and then we could have our push notifications triggered whenever a new message is created. So whenever I save this message in the screen on the right, which is, it says, thank you, I appreciate it. Whenever I save that message to the database, an event is triggered in AWS Lambda. It sees that, it runs our code, and then it whatever our code does, it just executes it. So in our case, it sends out a notification just like that. So now we have the entire mobile app built out, right? But we're about to deploy, and now, like I said, we're going to need that privacy policy, and we're going to need our terms and conditions. So let's go ahead and make a website too, right? Because we also want to be able to market this thing. So what we can do is we can go ahead and use Vapor if we wanted to build out a website, because I didn't mention this before, but Vapor has a lot of different frameworks or a lot of different packages or libraries that it uses that make up Vapor as a whole. There's a lot of different things happening under there. So like if you start a Vapor project, you're actually going to see like a big long list come into your project. And that's just because it's so modular and everything's broken out into specific functionality that you are going to essentially be able to work with a lot of different things. So the package or the library that we're going to be working with if we wanted to build out a website in Vapor is going to be Leaf. Now, Leaf is a templating language, I think, and Leaf allows you to essentially build templates of what your website should look like. And then you can actually tie this to your backend because it's still using the same Vapor code, right? Like you can have the backend and the front end kind of in the same code base, and you can actually show dynamic content by using, calling one of your APIs from your website. So it makes it dynamic, and then it also allows you to have like everything kind of like into one project. So if you did choose to go with Vapor on the back end, right? If you decided to spin up the server and deploy your Vapor app somewhere, then you can just continue to add to that Vapor app, and then you can build a website on top of it that interacts with that information that is that information that Vapor has the ability to provide to any front-end app. Now, the option that I would generally choose is John Sindell's publish framework. Now, this is like, I think this is like really cool. This is my favorite thing because, John Sindell, awesome dude, put out this publish framework, and he actually built his entire website using this publish framework, which he built, which is really cool. And it allows you to create this static website. Now, essentially what you would be doing is you're writing your Swift code, and the way that he made this framework, this publish framework, is it allows you to build out the HTML, but using Swift so that you don't necessarily have to continually repeat yourself. So if you have worked with HTML in the past, you know that it's a very repetitive process, and you have to build out everything like over and over again. That's the awesome thing about using a programming language to do this, is that you're able to build out this static website, write a few lines of code, have it run through loops to populate the content with different items and objects and things like that. And that's actually what I built my website on top of as well. So I highly recommend John Sindell's Publish framework. It is possible to have dynamic content. So it's built for static websites, but I played around a little bit with it. It is possible to get, to have your website make an API call, get some data back, and then have that rendered out. So like if you wanted to have comments on your blog post or something like that, then you can also implement that type of thing. I haven't explored that too much, but I do know it's possible because I played with it a little bit. And then the last thing that I'll say is that you can deploy this anywhere, but it's really easy to deploy on AWS Amplify. You can either just drag and drop your project onto Amplify and it will deploy it, or you can push your code up to GitHub and then have Amplify watch that specific repository and then build out your website that way. So there's so many different possibilities of what you can do with Swift. As you saw, we were going through the process of building out, the front end. We looked over a couple of the options for the back end. We even talked about some of the options for, if you wanted to build out a website, but that's not the limit. That's not the limit of what Swift is capable of, right? So you're able to still do so many more things. You could run it on like a Raspberry Pi. There's something called WASM, WebAssembly out there that you can work with. I've even seen implementation of having Swift on Android. It's called Skade. It looks like it's out of date. It also had a pricing thing on it. I wasn't too sure about it, but it does look like Swift is going places and it's going to continue to go places. So there's just so many different things and so many different possibilities for Swift. And of course, becoming a full stack developer is one of them. So that's going to be it for my presentation. Once again, my name is Kyle Lee, aka Kilo Loco. You can find me at Kilo_Loco. That's not right. So it says Kilo space Loco. It's Kilo_Loco. Or you can check me out on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel where I do mobile development tutorials, and that's at Kilo Loco as well. So thank you for your time, and go out there and code passionately.